Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started on the second demonstration, a coding demonstration on this app that we're building, which I'm just calling CRUD, Students Create, Read, Update, and Delete. And so where we left off, and after the first video, was npm start, was here. So let's just fire this up real quick, and let me stop the other one from running. And now we go. And this was the working app where we just seeded. We seeded our app with a bunch of dummy data, and we got a little warning here, and I said, hey, I want to address this in the next video. So it says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Anyways, after kind of digging into this, you're going to notice this happens anytime with a map. And so anytime we're mapping students, and for each student we have a card, I incorrectly was putting the key on the list items, but what you need to do is put a key on the root element of the markup. And so this is going to be the way that we kind of identify each group of markup. And so the best thing to do for a key is to have a unique identifier for that particular entity. And so luckily we have a student ID that is globally unique identifier that we use to identify each student. So long story short, you're going to go ahead and put I'll put a key student.id, and this is going to be what we use to uniquely identify each div. And this is just used by React kind of behind the scenes, so that as we start doing deletes and edits, it's going to use this key to know which one to edit, update, delete, so on and so forth. That gets rid of that error message. If I refresh and save students, you can see no longer do we have that error message. The next thing I wanted to do, so here now we have a key on our array.map, and so what's this video going to be on? In this video, we're just going to have the create feature. We're going to create new students. And so we're starting with the C of CRUD. We're going to add a new student. And in that, what's kind of unique here is we're going to allow an end user to kind of update that information, including a photo. So we're going to have an upload control that allows an end user to browse their computer, select a photo, and then have that used in the web page. And then as part of that, we're going to actually see how to create our own components in React. Right now, there's just one component. We're gonna create a new component, and as part of creating that component, we're going to pass some data, or in this case, we're going to pass a method to that component so that we can use that method. And we'll see how that works. So basically the C of the CRUD in this video is the objective. Now, it's also worth noting that a lot of time these keys are really not important, obviously, to the end user. So even though I kind of left them in here, I'm going to go ahead and take the key out of my list. And that's just not really relevant for the end user to see. And so there we go. So, what I'm imagining here are some controls to allow a first name, a last name, and an email address to allow an end user to put that in. And, you could put these controls on top or on bottom. It doesn't really matter. I'll suppose I'll put the controls above for now, and we'll see if I like it. And so, we need some text boxes. There's an input type of email for an email address. Get something formatted like an email address. And and that gets it going. You know, another thing that might be worth fixing here is on a mobile view, you know, these images are huge. Maybe setting a max width on these images. Not super important, just something that's crossed my mind, and maybe some text center and some small things to kind of format this page a little bit better in a mobile view, but again, not the important part of this lecture. So we are going to, right now, everything is inside this app.js, and the idea behind React is it's front-end user interfaces with components. And the idea is that these components can all be complex logic in themselves, and they all kind of come together to work together to create the web page. And so when I think of, you know, Facebook, I think of the chat component, and I think of the marketplace component, and I think of the search component, and I think of, you know, the feed component, and I think of all these different areas that kind of can be coded as individual entities. And so, you know, the way that we'll create another component is by adding another JavaScript file. So I'll go ahead and in my source folder, we'll just click a new file, and I'll just call this addStudent.js. So this will be the add student component. And you'll see, just like here in the app, you know, the way this is laid out is we've got some import statements at the top. We've got one function called app, which, you know, at the end of this, we export the function. So that in our index.js, we can import the app function here, call it app, import app from the file app.js, and it looks very much like an HTML entity with the angle brackets and the /. And so we'll be able to kind of format the same here, add student. We'll have kind of the same thing here with, we'll get some Bootstrap going on. Now, we should be able to use Bootstrap already. So let's go ahead and import use state, you know, import and I'll have a few more imports, and we'll make a function called addStudent. And down at the bottom, we're going to export default addStudent. And so very similar to how this is set up, app.js, we will set that up the same way for addStudent. The next thing I'm going to import as well is nanoid. Okay, now when it comes to our hooks, kind of remembering what a student has an ID, a first name, a last name, and a photo. And so we'll create some hooks here. I'll start with first name. Set first name. And the reason is ID, we're going to just use nanoid for our new students. We're not accepting that as input from the end user. So we can kind of handle the ID behind the scenes. We don't need to make a hook for it. And for our photo, we're going to have a file uploader. That's going to allow a user to select a file on their computer. And so we'll go ahead and make a variable called selected file. Set selected file. And you might put null, but I just leave that blank. Okay, so ultimately these are going to be our hooks, and we need to also, inside of our function, if I kind of refer here, after our seed data, which was this array of objects, we have our return statement, and inside of the return statement is where you see this JSX, which is a combination of your normal HTML tags, and then you've got these braces, curly braces, where you could insert some JavaScript. And so inside this return, you have JSX. And so I'll have a return statement. Ends here on line 95, line 96 ends the app. So this is inside the function. We've got a return. And let's go ahead and put a div class name row and kind of get that going. So we'll start this with a row. And just for getting this up and running, we'll do div. Now, if I'm remembering right, I broke this up on large devices with my call large to. I'll change that to medium devices. Call medium and up. So we'll just make medium our breakpoint. Class name. Call medium. And I want 4 columns. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 3, 6, 9, and 12. So right now, we're using Bootstrap, but we don't have a using Bootstrap up here. We don't have a but it should work. And so what comes next, just to get it up and running and get this working together, to get these components working together, I'm going to add the tag, and here's my container, and this is my row with each student in it, so maybe above. So we'll call add. Now, in order to use this add student, we need to have an import up here. Import add student from add student. So this is the file addstudent.js, and we're calling the tag add student, which will allow us to come into here, which is this is our app.js, and now call add student empty tag. And there's our Bootstrap column. And you can see the call medium 3s are working, so it's playing nice with Bootstrap. I didn't have to import Bootstrap. Okay, so what I'm imagining is a first name in the first column, a text box and a label, a text box and a label. For first name, last name, then we'll have a file control, upload, and a button that submits the new student. And so now we can start working on our HTML a little bit. So instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, break this down like such. And let's have a label. Now, typically you do label 4, but in Bootstrap, there's, instead of just saying class, you have class name. It's HTML4.
This is for React only?
Yeah, this is how you do it in React. A lot of times in JavaScript, it takes, class is a keyword in JavaScript, so you can't call it class because it's a keyword, so they create the class name instead. Same thing, for is a keyword, it's a loop, right? So instead of saying the for attribute, use HTML4. So whenever they have conflicts like that.
Sure.
So label for the text box. Class name is form label. First name. Input type of text. ID is text first name. Should be consistent with single quotes or double quotes. Placeholder. First name. Class of form control. On change, we're gonna call the hook, which is set first name. EVT, arrow, set first name, EVT, current target, dot value. Okay, so when we change, here's the event object. We use that event object to get the value. And we're going to put the value attribute equal to the, wait a tick, I'm missing a curly. That curly belongs right here to close on change. And the value is first name. Again, this is the function call, and then this is the variable in our hook. And this is an input control, so it should be self-closing. And let's take a look. Okay, so we get the first name label, first name text box, and there we go. Since last name's pretty similar, we'll go ahead and copy and paste, make sure we don't have any, don't forget anything for the last name, but text last name, text last name, placeholder is last name. The onChange calls set last name, and the value attribute displays last name. And local hosts. Okay, doing good. Last name, first name. Third field is a little different with the email. But let's go ahead, copy paste, label for text email, input type of email, at least you get a little validation there, something that's formatted like an email. ID is text email. Placeholder is email address. OnChange is called, I totally forgot my email. They have emails, right? Yeah. Const email. Set email. Pretty sure I need to put null in here, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so there's my email, set email, and back to here, placeholder is email address, set email, email. This will say okay. And a submit button maybe on the next row or something. Or you know what? Let's just do so you got to get to 12, so 3, you know, so we could do 2, 2, 2, 2, so that's 8, and then maybe the last one's 4. For the button. So 4 and 5. So a little bit condensed there, but 5 gets a little bit more space. And so for this control, let's have a label. HTML4 file upload. This one's the unique control. Form label. And this is input type of file. Name is file. ID is file upload. So that gives us the label, and when we click the button, we get, it's going to browse, open up a dialog box to browse our local computer. So we got email address, last name, first name, student image, and now we need a submit button, or not a submit button because we don't want it to submit the form. We're going to be on the same page, so we'll just do a button type of button. Button type of button. ID is button add student, button add. Class name, button success, button large. Add student. And if we want it below, then we just remove add student above this, and we put it down here, wherever you want the controls. I kind of like the controls, I guess, below. And then maybe one more thing that I'll do is add some margin to the top.
That looks good.
Yeah. And see how it looks on mobile. Now this button, input type of file, I'm kind of curious what Bootstrap would go on that to make it not just look like a standard HTML button. Not that that makes a big difference. I wonder if I put a class name of button danger. No. BTN.
A little bit.
Meh. Not important. Okay, now, kind of going back to, we've already added the component in React and imported it and got it displaying. Then there's this note here about passing a method to a new component file. Well, why would I want to pass so the new file is add student. So add student is a is a component. And why would I want to pass a method over to here? Well, as it turns out, our hook is called all students and set all students. We have access to these methods when we're inside of app. Like ultimately our data is being stored here inside of app. And when we want to add a student, well, we need to ultimately change this variable. How do we change that variable? Is to have this set all students. We need to call set all students. And so ultimately I need to call set all students from this file, from over here. So how do we do that? Basically, this is a function call that we need to work with over here. And so the way that I'm going to do that is by making a method or a function in this app .js that can call set all students and then passing that method into add student. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here I've got my hook, and this is my seed data, and here's my return statement. So after my seed data, I'll go ahead and make a function called add student. Okay, and for the input parameters, we're going to take a new student object. Okay, so here's our function. It takes one input, which is a new student. So you're going to pass the student in, and we need to add this new student to our array of all students. And thankfully in ES6 there's a condensed syntax for doing that using the spread operator. So I'll say constant updated students equals, and we're going to spread all students. Again, all students is our current array of objects, and we add the new student to the end. So we say our updated students is a copy of all students with new student, which you're passed in. So now updated students has all of our data from all students as well as new student at the end. And then we're going to call our set all students. We're going to call set all students, passing it the updated students array. Okay, so this is a kind of a nice syntax for making a copy of an array and then adding something to it at the end. And so here's our function called add student that we need to pass into this other component called add student. So we're going to make this function, we're going to send it over to add student. The way that this is going to be done is in our element called add student, we can use a property add student equals. This is where we pass the add student method. So this syntax is kind of add student, add student, add student. So the element is called add student, and we're going to pass a function right here, this add student function, through an HTML. So again, this is an element and this is an attribute. But this is going to ultimately be what we need to call this function over here in this add student file. Now in here we're going to ultimately call that function through an argument here called props. So through this props argument, we're going to have access to add student. And I'll show that in just a minute. Let's go ahead, because right now we don't have anything that runs on our button click. So let's go ahead and run on click event handler, and I need to make a function called, and because I've got so many things called add student, I'm just going to call this do work. So I don't have my function do work here created yet, but let's go ahead and create our function do work. Okay. Okay, just took a quick break there, talk to somebody. So where I left off was this do work function. And what I need to do is we said, okay, on click do work. And so let's just make sure this is wired up. You know, real quick, I'll do okay, so I got class instead of class name, and so somewhere, let's find where I put the word class instead of class name. Maybe it was over here. Let's go back, refresh. Okay. Okay, we got hi mom fired. Okay, good. Now, you know, I kind of left off and I said, hey, we're gonna pass this function through to this prop. So our element add student, add student. So that's going to come over through this props, and ultimately through props, we're going to call this add student method. So let's go ahead and create our student object. So over here we have our, you know, all of our data for our student. So we'll say new student. And the student has an ID from nano ID. Now, again, I did import this, and notice that doesn't work if you don't do this import. So where Bootstrap, I didn't have to add the import again, but this nano ID I did. We got a first name property and the first name variable. So set the first name, last name property, last name. I believe I just called this one email property. Yep, email, colon email. And this one is interesting with the image. So the property is the image property. And what we have to do is do this URL, create object URL using the selected file. So this is the syntax that I'm going to use now to get the image to work. It's worth noting at this point that this, I got this to work today, and it will show you the image under the new student. However, when we go to save this, I'm not confident. Maybe it will work, but I might have to refactor this code later on, is what I'm getting at, to get this to work when we start saving our students to local storage, which is just a file on your hard drive. I might have to refactor this, but for right now, this is going to work as it's coded. So now we have our student object that has all of our data saved in it inside of the properties and values. Again, for the values, we're using our hooks. So here's our first name hook, last name hook, email, and ultimately selected file. And now I get to show you the props. And so for props, through this props parameter, so again, in here we've got this variable called props. It's called a parameter. We can say props dot, and here's our add student method. Ultimately, add student as defined right here. Props dot add student, new student. So here's our student object. We pass it to the add student method. The add student method, as defined right here, uses a spread operator to add the new student parameter into our all students array that we spread, and create a new array of objects called updated students, and we set all students to updated students. So that's kind of the workflow. That's how things are passed around. And we are not quite done because we haven't quite finished working with this file upload, because ultimately we need to say on change, when we change whatever is selected, I need to call a handler here. So I'll make a function called image update. And when we call this function, we're going to call our set selected file to event target files sub 0. So here we're calling our hook to put data into this selected file variable, and this selected file variable is used in our object here. So now we need to, on change, we need to call image update. On change, image update. So on click, we do work, and on change, image update. And now the question is, let's see what's broke. Okay, save students. Okay. Bring this in. Bob Marley, bob@marley.com. Choose a file. Now I've got just a couple of images saved here on my desktop. And there we have it. We have Bob Marley at bobmarley.com. Mark. And let's choose programmer 2. And there we see we've got Mark Zuckerberg. Now, image sizes, these are obviously bigger images than what those images are. So again, I think that goes into the formatting of the cards and getting those more consistent. But that's the add student function. Now, keep in mind, this data does not persist. Right now, we're not saving our students anywhere. Every time we load the page, we see the save student button. This is the workflow, so we lose our data, and ultimately in this ultimately here we will be changing that. We'll be saving our data to local storage. Okay, and so I'll stop the recording here for today.